The morning sun cast long, golden beams across the cracked concrete steps of Jefferson High. The building looked tired, its bricks weathered, its paint chipped, as though it carried the weight of too many years of neglected care. Inside, the hallways hummed with restless energy, lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked, and clusters of students laughed, shoved, and shouted in the rhythm of teenage chaos. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed newcomers with open arms. At exactly 7:55 a.m., Ms. Daniels stood at the front doors, a leather satchel hanging from her shoulder, her posture straight as a spear. She was young, only in her late 20s, but her calm composure carried the authority of someone who had walked through storms and learned how to stand in the rain without flinching. Dressed in a pressed white blouse and dark slacks, she looked every bit the professional, though there was a softness to her expression that revealed she still believed in the power of teaching. She inhaled deeply, whispering to herself, "First impressions matter." With that, she pushed through the doors and stepped into the heart of Jefferson High. The staff had given her warnings in half-smiling, half-serious tones. Don't expect respect right away. Classroom 2B has eaten teachers alive. Those kids, they smell weakness. But Ms. Daniels hadn't come here to be liked. She had come here to teach. Her heels clicked steadily on the linoleum floor as she moved toward her classroom. Students turned their heads, curious. Some whispered, not maliciously, but with that raw curiosity that always accompanied change. A few girls admired her confidence. A few boys exchanged smirks, already plotting tests of her patience. When she reached room 2B, she paused outside the door, smoothed her blouse, and walked in. The room was loud. A cluster of boys at the back corner threw balled-up paper at each other. Two girls painted their nails while whispering gossip. Another student blasted music through a phone speaker, the lyrics echoing crudely against the walls. No one noticed her at first. That was fine. She set her satchel on the desk, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote her name on the board in a clear, steady hand. Ms. Daniels. The squeak of chalk finally drew a few eyes. Someone muttered, "New teacher," and laughter rippled across the back row. She turned, smiling faintly. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Ms. Daniels, and this is English literature." The class responded with a chorus of apathy. A boy near the window, tall, broad-shouldered, with a defiant slump in his chair, let out an exaggerated yawn. His friends snickered. He was the kind of student who could command a room with his arrogance, and he already seemed to have declared himself her challenger. But Ms. Daniels didn't flinch. She studied him for a moment, then let her eyes sweep across the room, meeting each face without hesitation. "I know it's Monday. I know you'd rather be anywhere but here. But I promise you this, in my classroom, every voice matters, and every mind counts. If you give me respect, you'll get it back. That's how we'll work." Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't harsh. But it carried the weight of someone who expected to be heard. Some students straightened instinctively. Others rolled their eyes. The tall boy at the back, his name, she would later learn, was Darren, leaned over to his friend and whispered something that made them both laugh. Ms. Daniels let it pass. For now. She opened her satchel and pulled out a stack of books, slim, worn copies of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She began passing them out row by row, her voice calm, steady. "We're starting with a story of survival, of finding your voice when the world wants to silence you. It's about courage, dignity, and truth. All things I believe matter, not just in literature, but in life." A few students perked up at the mention of courage. 1. Girl in the front row sat straighter, clutching the book with interest. Another muttered, "At least it's not Shakespeare," which sparked a few laughs. By the time she returned to the front of the class, every student had a book in front of them. Darren tossed his copy onto the floor dramatically. The sound echoed. His friends smirked, waiting for Ms. Daniels to lose her cool. But she didn't. She simply walked to his desk, picked up the book, dusted it off, and placed it neatly back in front of him. "You might not see it now," she said softly, "but words are more powerful than fists. Give this book a chance, you may find it fights harder than you think." Darren stared at her, caught off guard. His friends laughed again, but quieter this time. Ms. Daniels walked back to the board. "Turn to page 3. Let's begin." For the next 30 minutes, the classroom shifted. Not completely, whispers still filled the corners, doodles still crept across notebooks, but a rhythm began to form. She read aloud, her voice strong and lyrical, drawing the students into Angelou's world. And though Darren pretended not to care, his eyes flicked to the page when he thought no one noticed. By the time the bell rang, something had shifted in the air. Not victory, not yet. But a seed had been planted. Some students lingered a little longer, tucking the book into their backpacks instead of leaving it behind. As the room emptied, Ms. Daniels stood at the front, watching them go. She knew the challenges ahead. She knew respect wouldn't come overnight. But she also knew this: she had not come here to survive Jefferson High. She had come to change it. And as the last student left, Darren glanced back, just for a second, his smirk faltering. It was only the first day, but Ms. Daniels could already feel it: the battle had begun. The days after Ms. Daniels' first lesson felt like a cautious truce. She carried herself with steady composure, always speaking with calm clarity, never raising her voice even when the classroom swelled with noise. Some students had softened, curious about the new teacher who refused to crack under pressure. A few had even started showing small signs of respect, turning to the right page, taking notes, listening when she read aloud. But not everyone. At the back of the classroom, Darren and his crew, 3 boys who carried arrogance like a shield, weren't finished testing her. To them, teachers were obstacles, not mentors. They had seen substitutes flee, had driven veteran teachers to near tears. If Ms. Daniels thought she was different, they were determined to prove her wrong. It began with whispers. During lectures, they leaned close together, muttering jokes just loud enough to be heard but not loud enough to get caught outright. Then came the tapping, pencils drumming against desks, knuckles rapping against chairs, a rhythm of defiance meant to rattle her. Ms. Daniels heard every sound. She noticed every smirk. But instead of snapping, she kept teaching. Sometimes, she paused and simply looked in their direction, her gaze calm, unblinking. The silence made some of the other students shift uncomfortably, but she never lost control of her temper. That calmness unsettled Darren more than any shouting could have. He thrived on chaos. He wanted to see anger, to feel the satisfaction of breaking authority. But Ms. Daniels wouldn't give it to him. One Wednesday morning, Darren upped the game. As she passed out a quiz on poetry, he crumpled his paper into a ball and tossed it across the room. Laughter rippled through the class. The paper landed near Ms. Daniels' feet. She picked it up, smoothed it out, and placed it back on his desk. "You'll need this," she said evenly. "Not if I don't care about passing," Darren shot back, leaning back in his chair. The room went still. The challenge was open now. Ms. Daniels studied him for a long moment, then replied, "Maybe not. But I care about whether you learn. And as long as you're in this room, I'm not giving up on you." A hush spread over the students. It wasn't the answer they expected. No anger. No punishment. Just conviction. Darren tried to laugh it off, but something in her tone shook him. The next day, the interruptions grew louder. Darren and his friends started mocking her reading voice, repeating her words in exaggerated tones. Respect. Courage. Dignity, they drawled, dragging each word into a cruel echo. The class erupted in nervous laughter. Ms. Daniels didn't shout. She closed her book, placed it on the desk, and waited. The silence stretched until even the laughter faded. Then she said quietly, "I see what you're doing. You want me to lose control. You want me to stop believing in this classroom. But that's not going to happen." She leaned against the desk, folding her arms. "Do you know why?" No one answered. The room felt tight, suspended. "Because I believe," she continued, her voice steady, "that every single person in this room has a voice worth hearing. Even you. Especially you. You can waste your energy trying to drown out mine, or you can figure out how to use your own. But understand this, I won't be silenced." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For the first time, Darren looked away. His smirk faltered, just slightly. But pride was a heavy chain, and he wasn't ready to let go. On Friday, the tension finally erupted. It was just before lunch, the air heavy with restless hunger, the classroom buzzing with chatter. Ms. Daniels was explaining the theme of resilience in Angelou's poetry when Darren slammed his chair back and muttered, "This is pointless." Heads turned. Everyone knew something was coming. "Excuse me?" Ms. Daniels asked softly. Darren stood, towering over his desk. "Why should we care about some old lady's life? No. None of this matters. None of you matter." His friends cackled, egging him on. The room buzzed with shock. This was more than defiance. This was open disrespect. Ms. Daniels felt a flash of heat rise in her chest, but she steadied it. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her eyes locked on his, not with anger, but with unshakable steadiness. "Sit down," she said calmly. For a heartbeat, it looked as though he might obey. Then, with a defiant grin, he snatched the chalk from her hand and scrawled across the board, "Darren's class." The room roared with laughter. That was it. The line had been crossed. But Ms. Daniels didn't scream. She didn't call for help. Instead, she picked up the eraser, wiped the board clean, and looked directly at him. "You want to be a leader, Darren? Fine. But leadership isn't about humiliating others. It's about responsibility. About respect. If you can't lead yourself, you'll never lead anyone else." Her words sliced through the noise. The laughter faltered. Students looked from her to Darren, waiting for his next move. For a long, tense moment, Darren just stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched. His pride screamed for him to push harder, to win this battle. But her calm gaze didn't waver. Finally, with a scoff, he dropped the chalk and slumped back into his seat. His friends muttered under their breath, but the room was silent now. Silent in a way it hadn't been since she arrived. Ms. Daniels turned back to the class as if nothing had happened. "Page 72, she said, her tone even. "Let's continue." The students opened their books, some still glancing at Darren, others sneaking looks at Ms. Daniels with newfound respect. The balance had shifted. Darren hadn't been defeated, not yet. He would strike again, harder, more cruelly. But for the first time, he realized something he hadn't expected: this teacher would not break. And deep down, beneath the armor of arrogance, a tiny seed of respect, or perhaps fear, had been planted. The challenge had only begun. Friday afternoon sunlight streamed through the half-closed blinds of room 2B, painting stripes across the chalkboard. The week had been tense, like walking a tightrope strung between defiance and discipline. Ms. Daniels had held her ground, never raising her voice, never giving Darren the satisfaction of seeing her crack. But everyone knew something was coming. The air buzzed with the promise of confrontation. It started small, as it always did. Darren leaned back in his chair, balancing dangerously on two legs while his friends whispered and snickered. A crumpled note sailed across the room. A pencil snapped in half and clattered to the floor. Each little disruption chipped at the rhythm of the lesson, but Ms. Daniels kept moving, steady as a drumbeat. She was speaking about metaphor, about how Maya Angelou's words turned pain into power, when Darren muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Power? She's just whining in fancy sentences." The class froze, waiting for the reaction. Ms. Daniels set her book down. "That's an opinion, Darren," she said evenly. "And in this classroom, opinions can be voiced with respect. You can disagree, but you don't belittle." Her calmness only fed his pride. He grinned, leaned closer to his friends, and whispered something crude that made them laugh out loud. "Enough," Ms. Daniels said, her voice low, firm. But Darren wasn't done. He thrived on the eyes of his audience, the electric current of rebellion sparking through the room. And today, he wanted to win. He pushed back his chair with a screech and stood. At 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and swaggering with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences, Darren towered over her. "Respect," he sneered. "Why should we respect you? You don't belong here. This is our class." Gasps fluttered through the rows. Some students looked down, afraid of what was unfolding. Others leaned forward, hungry for the drama. Ms. Daniels stepped closer, her chin raised, her eyes locked on his. "I belong here because I'm your teacher. And as long as I'm standing in this room, I will be treated with respect." The words should have ended it. But Darren's pride was a wildfire. He needed more. In one swift, shocking motion, he reached out and yanked at the fabric of her blouse. The sound of ripping cloth cracked through the silence like a gunshot. The class erupted, shrieks, laughter, disbelief. A chorus of chaos. Some students clutched their mouths, others shouted, "Whoa!" A phone was lifted to record. In seconds, the room transformed into a circus. Ms. Daniels staggered back, her blouse torn across the sleeve. For a fraction of a heartbeat, pain flickered in her eyes. Not physical pain, but the sting of humiliation, of being stripped of dignity in front of 30 watching faces. Darren smirked, arms spread wide like a conquering king. "See? You can't control us." The noise swelled. Some cheered, some jeered, some sat frozen in shock. A moment like this could break a teacher. Many would have fled the room, trembling, humiliated, defeated. That was what Darren wanted. But Ms. Daniels did not flee. Her breath steadied. Her feet planted firmly on the linoleum floor. She remembered the long nights of training at the dojo, the feel of the mat beneath her, the echo of her sensei's voice, "Strength is not rage. Control is power. Never attack, only defend, with dignity." The laughter rang in her ears, but her mind sharpened. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders, meeting Darren's smug eyes. "Enough," she said again, not a shout, not a plea, but a command that cut through the noise. The room hushed, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Darren stepped closer, towering, expecting her to shrink. Instead, she shifted her stance, calm, rooted. The class sensed it, something had changed. A storm was coming, but not the one Darren expected. "Don't touch me again," she said quietly. The warning might have gone unheard if not for the steel in her tone. But Darren, intoxicated by the thrill of dominance, ignored it. He lunged, grabbing for her arm in a show of mock control. And that's when it happened. In one fluid motion, precise and practiced, Ms. Daniels seized his wrist, pivoted on her heel, and used his own momentum against him. With the grace of discipline and the strength of conviction, she executed a perfect judo throw. The world seemed to slow. Darren's body arced through the air, then slammed onto the floor with a thud that rattled the desks. Silence. The classroom was frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. Darren lay stunned on the floor, breath knocked out of him, staring up at the ceiling as if the world had shifted beneath him. Ms. Daniels didn't gloat. She didn't even move toward him. She stood calm, composed, adjusting her torn blouse with steady hands. "This class is about respect," she said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And you will learn it." The silence was absolute. The laughter was gone. Even Darren's friends sat stiff, unsure whether to help him up or pretend they weren't with him. The phone that had been raised to record slowly lowered. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. Not through shouting. Not through punishment. But through controlled strength, the kind that left no room for mockery. Darren groaned, pulling himself to his feet, his bravado shattered. He didn't meet her eyes. He slumped back into his chair, face red, his smirk gone. The class watched him, then her, then the board. No one moved, no one spoke. The tension hung heavy, but beneath it pulsed something new, awe. Ms. Daniels walked calmly back to her desk, picked up her book, and opened it. "Page 103, she said evenly. "Let's continue." And just like that, the lesson resumed. But nothing in room 2B was the same. The line had been crossed, and Ms. Daniels had shown them what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The sound of Darren's body hitting the floor still echoed in room 2B long after the moment had passed. The slam had cut through laughter, silenced taunts, and left a vacuum in the air, the kind of silence so sharp it hurt the ears. For the first time all year, the class wasn't in control. Ms. Daniels stood tall at the front, her blouse still torn but her posture unshaken. She didn't look like a teacher who had just been humiliated. She looked like a woman who had made a choice, to stand, to defend, to command. Her eyes scanned the classroom, not with anger, but with a steadiness that made every student drop their gaze. "Open your books," she said simply, her voice calm, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But the students couldn't. They sat frozen, glancing at Darren, at her, at each other. The weight of the moment pressed on their shoulders. Even Darren, who prided himself on never backing down, couldn't meet her eyes. He sat slumped in his chair, rubbing his wrist where she had gripped him, the fire of his rebellion dimmed to smoke. A minute passed. Then two. Slowly, as if afraid to break the spell, a girl in the front row turned to the right page. Then another followed. Within moments, the rustle of paper filled the room. No one dared speak out of turn. Ms. Daniels resumed reading aloud, her voice measured and clear. She didn't lecture them about what had happened. She didn't bask in victory. She let her control speak for itself. But the silence outside the classroom was broken quickly. Word spread like wildfire. By the end of the period, whispers snaked through the hallways. "Yo, did you hear? Darren got thrown." She flipped him like it was nothing. "Nah, no way. For real. For real." He was on the floor. Whole class saw it. By lunch, the entire school was buzzing. Some kids laughed about it, some exaggerated the story until it sounded like Ms. Daniels had body-slammed him through the desk, but all agreed on one thing: she wasn't to be messed with. The teachers heard it too. Some reacted with disbelief. Others with quiet admiration. A few shook their heads, muttering that it would cause trouble with the administration. And trouble came quickly. Halfway through the afternoon, the intercom crackled. "Ms. Daniels, please report to the principal's office." The class erupted into whispers. Some students looked worried, others smug, convinced she was in trouble. Darren smirked faintly, a glimmer of hope that she might face consequences after all. Ms. Daniels closed her book and set it down gently. "Continue reading to the end of the chapter," she instructed, her voice as calm as ever. Then she walked out, head held high, every step measured. The walk to the principal's office felt long, the hallways lined with curious stares. She could hear the whispers trailing behind her. "That's her. She did it. She's the one who flipped him." When she reached the office, Principal Harding was waiting. A tall, stern man with silver hair and a reputation for order, he gestured for her to sit. Darren was already there, sitting with his arms crossed, face twisted into a mask of defiance. His mother, red-faced and furious, sat beside him. "I want her fired," Darren's mother snapped before Ms. Daniels could even sit down. "How dare she lay a hand on my son? He could have been injured. This is outrageous." Principal Harding raised a hand. "Let's hear the full story first." His eyes turned to Ms. Daniels. "Is it true you physically engaged a student?" Ms. Daniels met his gaze without flinching. "It's true that Darren assaulted me first. He ripped my blouse. He grabbed my arm. I defended myself, using controlled technique to prevent further harm. I did not strike him. I restrained him with the least force necessary." Darren scoffed. "That's a lie. She attacked me." But Harding's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" "Because I've already spoken to 3 other students. They all said the same thing: you put your hands on her first." Darren shifted uncomfortably, but his mother jumped in. "He's just a boy. She's an adult. She should have handled it differently." Ms. Daniels spoke softly, but firmly. "With respect, ma'am, your son is taller, stronger, and could have done real harm if I hadn't stopped him. I chose the safest response, one that protected me without injuring him. I will not apologize for defending myself." Harding leaned back, silent for a moment. His gaze lingered on Ms. Daniels, then shifted to Darren. "You've been warned before, Darren. Disruption. Disrespect. Now assault." His voice hardened. "You're suspended for a week." "What?" Darren's mother shot up. "You're punishing my son and not her." Harding's voice stayed calm but cold. Ms. Daniels acted within her rights. "The witnesses are unanimous. This meeting is over." The mother stormed out, dragging Darren behind her. He didn't look back. Harding turned back to Ms. Daniels. His tone softened. "I'll be honest, not every teacher would have kept control the way you did. The district might frown on the theatrics, but given the circumstances, you showed remarkable restraint. Just try not to throw any more students if you can help it." A faint smile flickered at the corner of his lips. Ms. Daniels allowed herself a small breath of relief. "Thank you, sir." As she left the office, the whispers in the hall grew louder. But this time, they weren't mocking. They were filled with awe. That evening, as she packed her bag, a quiet knock came at her classroom door. It was the girl from the front row, the one who had sat straighter on the first day. "Ms. Daniels," she said shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For not letting him win." Ms. Daniels smiled warmly. "Thank you for noticing. But remember, what happened today wasn't about winning. It was about respect. For myself. For this classroom. And for you." The girl nodded, her eyes bright. "I get it. And I think everyone else does now too." When Ms. Daniels finally left the school that day, the air outside was cool, the sky streaked with the fading gold of sunset. She walked down the steps with her satchel on her shoulder, the torn blouse tucked discreetly beneath her jacket. She knew the battle wasn't over. Darren's pride would make him lash out again. The other bullies would circle, waiting for weakness. But something had shifted, undeniably, unshakably. She had drawn a line. And when Darren crossed it, she didn't break. She stood. And because she stood, the students had seen something they would never forget: strength without cruelty, power without rage, dignity without compromise. It wasn't the end of the fight. But it was the beginning of respect. Monday morning arrived with a sharpness in the air, the kind that prickled skin and whispered of change. The events of Friday, the ripped blouse, the judo throw, the stunned silence, lingered in every corner of Jefferson High. The whispers hadn't died down over the weekend, they had grown. By now, every student in the building had heard the story. Some versions painted Ms. Daniels as a hero, a warrior who refused to be bullied. Others twisted her into a villain, a teacher who used force. But no matter the spin, the truth was undeniable: she was not like the teachers before her. She would not be broken. As the first bell rang, Ms. Daniels walked into room 2B. The room was unusually quiet. No balled-up notes, no loud music, no mocking laughter. The students sat waiting, eyes on her, the weight of expectation pressing thick as fog. Even Darren, recently suspended, was absent, but his shadow still lingered, his friends sitting stiff, their usual arrogance dimmed. Ms. Daniels placed her satchel on the desk and looked around the room. She didn't rush into a lecture or an assignment. She simply stood there, letting the silence breathe. Finally, she said, "We need to talk." Chairs creaked as students shifted. Some leaned forward, curious. Others avoided her gaze, bracing for scolding. But Ms. Daniels didn't sound angry. She sounded steady, calm, almost tender. "What happened last week," she began, "wasn't just about one student. It wasn't even just about me. It was about this room. About what kind of space we want it to be. So let's be honest with each other." She stepped closer to the rows, her voice softening. "How many of you think this classroom is a place where you can really learn? Where you can feel safe?" No hands went up. A few shook their heads. Ms. Daniels nodded slowly. "I didn't think so. And that's the problem. You've been taught that this room is a battlefield. That the loudest voice wins. That respect is earned through fear, or by tearing others down. Ms. Daniels nodded slowly. I didn't think so. And that's the problem. You've been taught that this room is a battlefield. That the loudest voice wins. That respect is earned through fear, or by tearing others down. Her gaze swept across them, holding each set of eyes. But that's not respect. That's weakness disguised as strength. A murmur rippled through the room. One boy in the second row muttered, "So what is respect then?" She smiled faintly. Respect is seeing the humanity in the person across from you, even when you disagree. Respect is strength under control. It's knowing you could hurt, but choosing not to. It's choosing dignity over dominance. Her words hung in the air, heavy but illuminating. I know what some of you thought when you saw me throw Darren. You thought, finally, she fought back. But here's the truth, that wasn't about fighting. That was about defending myself with control. Because losing control isn't power. It's fear wearing a mask. She paused, letting that sink in. The students were listening now, truly listening. No one doodled, no one whispered. Their eyes were on her, wide, searching. I need you to understand something, she continued, her voice steady. I didn't come here to win battles against you. I came here to teach you how to fight the right ones, the battles that matter. Against ignorance. Against injustice. Against the voices in the world that will try to tell you that you are less than you are. A hush settled deeper over the class. The girl in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. So, when Darren ripped your shirt and everyone laughed, weren't you humiliated? Ms. Daniels' eyes softened. Yes. For a moment, I was. But humiliation only lasts if you let it define you. What defines you is how you respond. I could have screamed. I could have walked out. But I chose not to. Because I needed you all to see that dignity doesn't crumble just because someone tries to tear it away. The girl nodded slowly, a new respect dawning in her eyes. From the back, one of Darren's friends spoke up, his tone more subdued than usual. But what if respect doesn't get you anywhere? Like, people don't care. They just push you until you break. Ms. Daniels turned to him, her voice firm but gentle. That's exactly why it matters. Because respect isn't about what they do. It's about who you decide to be. You can't control someone else's cruelty, but you can control whether you let it poison you. Strength isn't how loud you yell back, it's how clearly you stand when the world tries to push you down. The boy didn't argue. He lowered his eyes, thoughtful. Ms. Daniels walked back to the front of the class and picked up the chalk. On the board, she wrote 3 words in bold strokes. Respect. Strength. Dignity. These are not just words for poetry, she said, underlining them. These are choices. Every day, you'll be given chances to choose. To laugh at someone weaker, or to stand beside them. To tear down, or to build up. To cross the line, or to draw it. What you choose will define the person you become long after you leave this classroom. The room was silent. Students stared at the words as if they were seeing them for the first time. Then Ms. Daniels added a 4th word beneath the others. Responsibility. This is what I want from each of you, she said. Take responsibility for the kind of energy you bring into this room. If you choose chaos, you rob yourself and everyone else of growth. But if you choose respect, if you choose strength with dignity, this classroom can become a place where we all rise. Her voice softened again, almost a whisper. And I believe you're capable of rising. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the girl in the front row sat up straighter and said, "I'll try." Another student muttered, "Me too." And then, almost reluctantly, a boy at the back added, "Yeah. Same." It wasn't a chorus. It wasn't a revolution. But it was a start. Ms. Daniels smiled. "That's all I ask. Try. Because the world outside this room will challenge you harder than Darren ever did. And the only way you'll stand tall is if you start practicing now." The bell rang, sharp and sudden, but no one leapt from their seats. They gathered their books slowly, quietly, thoughtful. For the first time, the usual stampede out the door was replaced by something gentler, almost reverent. As the last student lingered at the doorway, he turned back. "Miss Daniels?" "Yes." He scratched his neck awkwardly. That was the realest thing any teachers ever said in here. She smiled warmly. Then it was worth saying. When the door closed behind him, Miss Daniels exhaled, alone in the quiet room. She glanced at the words still scrawled on the board: respect, strength, dignity, responsibility. They weren't just lessons for her students. They were reminders for herself. She knew battles still waited. Darren would return. Tests of patience would never stop. But today, she had done more than defend herself. She had planted something deeper. And for the first time, she believed this classroom might truly change. The quiet of Monday afternoon was a fragile thing. For the first time since she'd entered Jefferson High, Ms. Daniels felt the classroom settle into something close to peace. Students had left thoughtful, subdued, whispers of respect floated where jeers once echoed. She lingered at her desk after the final bell, replaying the conversation in her mind. But peace, she knew, never lasted long. As she packed her satchel, the phone on the wall rang, a sharp, metallic sound that pierced the stillness. She crossed the room, lifted the receiver, and heard Principal Harding's voice, low and urgent. "Ms. Daniels, I need you in the office. Now." Her pulse quickened. "Is something wrong?" There was a pause. "Darren's family is here. His uncle. And I think you'd better prepare yourself." When she hung up the phone, her stomach tightened. She straightened her blouse, squared her shoulders, and walked down the corridor. The students still loitering in the hall hushed as she passed, their eyes wide with curiosity. They already knew, word traveled faster than any intercom. The principal's office door stood open. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Darren sat in a chair, arms crossed, his face twisted with the same scowl he'd worn during his suspension hearing. Beside him, his mother fumed silently, cheeks flushed crimson. But it was the man standing by the window who caught Ms. Daniels' attention. Broad, sharp-jawed, with a suit too expensive for this neighborhood and eyes like steel, this was no ordinary parent. His presence radiated authority, the kind that didn't come from classrooms or school boards, but from boardrooms and influence. Harding gestured to him stiffly. "Ms. Daniels, this is Mr. Raymond Cole. Darren's uncle." Cole turned, his smile razor-thin. "Ah. The famous Ms. Daniels. I've heard a lot about you already." His tone was smooth, but beneath it lurked something dangerous. Ms. Daniels nodded. "And I've heard about you, Mr. Cole. Darren's told his classmates." "Plenty." Cole chuckled, slow and deliberate. "I imagine he has." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it intimate. You embarrassed my nephew. In front of an entire class. Threw him on the ground like some criminal. Do you know what that does to a young man's reputation? Ms. Daniels held his gaze, steady as ever. I know what it does when a young man assaults his teacher. Actions have consequences. The smile slipped. A flicker of irritation crossed Cole's face, quickly masked. He turned to Harding. Surely we can agree this situation has been mishandled. Darren is a boy. Impulsive, yes, but hardly deserving of such treatment. A week suspension is excessive. I think we can find a more reasonable resolution. Harding shifted uncomfortably. The witnesses. Cole raised a hand, silencing him. Witnesses can be convinced of anything. What matters is precedent. Do we really want to set one where teachers are manhandling students? Imagine how the school board will react. Imagine the headlines. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Harding's jaw tightened. Ms. Daniels stepped forward. With respect, Mr. Cole, the board should be more concerned with what happens when students attack their teachers. Your nephew crossed a line. If we erase the consequences, we teach every student here that disrespect wins. Is that the lesson you want him to learn? Cole's eyes narrowed. Careful, Ms. Daniels. You're new here. You don't know how this city works. And maybe that's why I won't play by its broken rules, she replied, her voice calm but cutting. The office went silent. Darren fidgeted in his chair, glancing nervously at his uncle. For the first time, cracks appeared in his bravado. Cole straightened his tie, mask slipping back into place. You're bold. I'll give you that. But boldness without protection is dangerous. You think the truth keeps you safe. The truth doesn't pay lawyers. The truth doesn't get votes at board meetings. Power does. Influence does. And I have both. Ms. Daniels didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time your nephew learns that power without respect is hollow. The words cut deeper than any threat. Cole's smile vanished entirely. He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. You're going to regret this. Harding finally intervened, his voice sharp. That's enough. This meeting is over. The suspension stands. Mr. Cole, if you wish to appeal, you can take it up with the district office. Cole's jaw clenched, but he gave a curt nod. He placed a heavy hand on Darren's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make the boy flinch. Come on, he said. As they left, Darren looked back at Ms. Daniels. For a split second, his bravado cracked, revealing something else, confusion, maybe even fear. When the door closed, Harding exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. You just made an enemy with deep pockets. Ms. Daniels lifted her chin. Then I'll fight with deeper conviction. Harding studied her, then gave a reluctant smile. You really are something else. That evening, the phone call came. Ms. Daniels was at home, sipping tea, trying to shake the tension of the day, when her phone buzzed. The number was unknown. She hesitated, then answered. A voice, low and mocking, slithered through the line. Ms. Daniels. Brave move today. Standing up to me like that. But you don't understand. You're not just teaching in a classroom anymore. You've stepped into a game you can't win. Her grip tightened on the phone. Mr. Cole. He chuckled. Smart. Yes, it's me. You embarrassed my family. And I don't let things like that slide. Tomorrow, I'll be at your classroom. Not as a parent. Not as an uncle. But as a reminder. We'll see how much respect your students have for you then. The line went dead. Ms. Daniels sat in the dim light, the silence heavy around her. Fear curled in her stomach, but beneath it burned something stronger. Determination. She knew tomorrow wouldn't just be another day at Jefferson High. It would be a test. Not of her strength. Not of her judo. But of her ability to turn fear into a lesson no one would ever forget. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low on the city like a warning. Jefferson High buzzed with nervous energy before the first bell had even rung. Students gathered in hushed clusters, whispering about what they had heard. He's coming today. Darren's uncle. He's powerful. Teachers don't mess with him. By the time Ms. Daniels walked into room 2B, the atmosphere was different. Not the usual chaos of flying notes and loud laughter, but tension. Eyes followed her every move, as though waiting to see how she would face the storm. She placed her satchel on the desk, took a slow breath, and scanned the room. Darren had returned, sitting in the back with his arms crossed, smirk painted back on his face. But it was brittle, thinner than before. His friends whispered around him, emboldened by rumor. The bell rang. Ms. Daniels picked up her book, ready to start the lesson, when the door opened. He entered like he owned the building. Raymond Cole. Sharp suit, polished shoes, presence heavy enough to bend the room around him. He didn't wait for permission. He strode to the front, ignoring Ms. Daniels completely, and turned to face the class. Well, he said smoothly, his voice carrying with ease, I've heard so much about this class. About my nephew's challenges. I thought I'd see for myself what kind of education he's receiving. Gasps rippled through the room. Some students glanced at Ms. Daniels, expecting her to object, but she stood still, her posture steady, her eyes fixed on Cole. This isn't a parent-teacher conference, she said evenly. You're not permitted to disrupt my classroom. Cole smiled thinly. Disrupt? I'm enhancing. These children need to know what real authority looks like. Not some young teacher who thinks tossing a boy on the floor proves anything. A nervous laugh slipped from Darren, quickly joined by his friends. The balance in the room teetered. Ms. Daniels stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying. Authority isn't walking into a room and demanding obedience. Authority is earning trust. Respect. Something you can't buy with money or force with fear. Cole's smile faltered. He took a slow step toward her, lowering his voice just enough for the students to lean in. You're brave. I'll grant you that. But bravery can be dangerous when it goes against people like me. People who can make sure you never teach again. People who can. Enough. The word cut through the room, sharp as a blade. But it didn't come from Ms. Daniels. It came from the front row, the girl who had sat straighter every lesson since day one. She stood now, hands trembling but voice steady. You don't get to come in here and scare our teacher. She's the only one who actually believes in us. The room went silent. Every eye turned to her. Cole blinked, momentarily thrown off. Then, one by one, more students rose. A boy in the second row. Another near the window. Even one of Darren's usual companions shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "She's right." Cole's face darkened. "Sit down. All of you." But they didn't. Ms. Daniels stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. Do you see, Mr. Cole? This is what real authority looks like. Not fear. Not threats. But courage. Respect. These students are choosing to stand. Not for me. For themselves. The words rippled like fire through the classroom. Students sat taller, shoulders squared, eyes bright. The tide had turned. Cole's jaw clenched. He looked at Darren, expecting him to rally the room back. But Darren's eyes were wide, darting between his classmates and his uncle. For the first time, he looked small. Ms. Daniels turned fully to the class. You have a choice right now. To stay silent, or to stand for what matters. Respect. Dignity. Responsibility. Which will it be? The answer came not in words but in motion. Chairs scraped as more students rose, until almost the entire class was on their feet. The energy was undeniable, a force greater than any Fred Cole could summon. He stood there, outnumbered not by bodies but by conviction. His face twisted, but he knew he'd lost. He gave a sharp laugh, brittle and empty. Very well. Enjoy your little revolution. He turned, striding to the door. But as he reached it, Ms. Daniels spoke one last time. Mr. Cole. He paused, back stiff. Tell Darren what you never taught him, that real strength isn't inherited through family names or bought with power. It's built here. In choices. In character. And one day, he'll understand that. Cole didn't reply. He left without another word, the door slamming behind him. For a long moment, the classroom held its breath. Then, slowly, the students sat back down, the tension dissolving into something lighter, freer. Ms. Daniels looked at them, pride swelling in her chest. Now, she said, picking up her book, let's get back to literature. Page 120. But no one moved right away. They were still staring at her, at each other, at the space where Cole had stood. Something had shifted permanently. The classroom wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was theirs. Even Darren sat silent, his face pale, his smirk gone. For once, he didn't challenge her. He simply opened his book and turned to the page. As Ms. Daniels began to read, her voice carrying over the room, she knew this was more than a lesson in literature. It was a reckoning. Not just for Darren. Not just for Cole. But for every student in room 2B who had just discovered that respect wasn't about fear. It was about standing, together. Weeks passed, but the memory of that day, the day Raymond Cole tried to seize control of room 2B and failed, lingered like an echo through the halls of Jefferson High. Students still whispered about it, not in tones of mockery, but with something resembling reverence. It had become part of the school's mythology, the day the new teacher stood tall, not just for herself, but for them. And room 2B was no longer the same. It started subtly. The chaos that once filled the air, the constant buzz of defiance, the soundtrack of laughter at others' expense, dulled. The pencils still tapped sometimes, but now it was rhythm instead of rebellion. The whispers hadn't vanished, but they carried curiosity instead of cruelty. Even the bullies, those who had once thrived on disruption, sat quieter. They weren't saints, not suddenly transformed, but they had learned a boundary that couldn't be crossed. Most surprising of all was Darren. When he returned from suspension, he came back with the swagger of someone determined to reclaim control. But something had shifted in him. The smirk was there, but it cracked easily. His voice was loud, but it wavered. And though he still tested Ms. Daniels in small ways, there was no more tearing, no more lunging, no more public humiliation. Because beneath it all, he knew. He had crossed the line once, and he had felt the consequence of it in a way that left no room for denial. He had seen his classmates stand against his uncle. And though his pride wouldn't let him admit it, a seed had been planted, the first quiet lesson of accountability. Ms. Daniels noticed it in the way he lingered after class one day, staring at his copy of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings with furrowed brows. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, but he didn't leave either. And when he finally walked out, he carried the book with him. The other students noticed too. They began raising hands more often, volunteering to read passages aloud. They asked questions, not to mock but to understand. A girl who had never spoken above a whisper delivered a flawless analysis of a poem one morning, earning applause that surprised her into tears. It wasn't perfection. There were still arguments, still moments when tempers flared and old habits reared up. But now, there was an undercurrent of something stronger, respect. Not just for Ms. Daniels, but for the classroom itself. Word spread to the rest of the school. Teachers from other grades marveled at the change. "What are you doing in there?" they asked her in the staff lounge. "2B hasn't been this calm in years." Ms. Daniels would smile and say simply, "I asked them to rise." But the truth was more complicated. She hadn't just asked. She had shown them, in every action, every word, every refusal to bow to fear, that respect wasn't demanded. It was lived. One Friday afternoon, Principal Harding stopped by. He leaned against the doorway as she finished a lesson, arms folded, a rare smile tugging at his usually stern face. When the bell rang and students shuffled out, he stepped in. "You know, Daniels," he said, "I wasn't sure how long you'd last when you first walked through those doors. But I've been hearing things. Good things. About you. About your class." Ms. Daniels arched a brow. "Good things at Jefferson High? That's rare." Harding chuckled. "Rare, but not impossible. What you've done in there, it's remarkable. You didn't just win them over. You changed them." She shook her head gently. "They changed themselves. I just held the line until they saw they could stand on it too." Harding nodded slowly. "Either way, you've made an impression. Even on Cole. He hasn't been back." At the mention of his name, Ms. Daniels' eyes sharpened. "He'll be back. People like him don't let go that easily." "Maybe," Harding said. "But when he does, I think you'll be ready." After he left, Ms. Daniels sat for a while in the quiet classroom. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting golden lines. Across the words still scrawled on the board, respect. Strength. Dignity. Responsibility. They had been there so long they had become part of the room, untouchable, like a creed etched into the walls. Her eyes lingered on the word responsibility. She thought about what it meant, not just for her students, but for herself. Teaching here wasn't just about literature. It wasn't even about discipline. It was about preparing young people to face a world that often mirrored Darren's arrogance and his uncle's hunger for power. A world that would test them, tempt them, and try to break them. And if they remembered nothing else from her class, she hoped they would remember this, that strength without respect was hollow, and that dignity was worth defending at any cost. The legacy of that year didn't end in room 2B. Students carried it into the hallways, into the cafeteria, into their homes. They told siblings, friends, even parents about the teacher who had stood her ground and flipped not just a bully, but the very culture of their classroom. Years later, some of those students would still remember her words. Some would recall the day she faced down a powerful man and didn't flinch. Some would remember the chalk on the board. Others would remember only the feeling, that for once, in that room, respect wasn't just a word in a lesson. It was alive. And for Ms. Daniels, that was enough. On the last day of the school year, as she stood at the front of the classroom one final time, the students surprised her. One by one, they walked to the board and wrote their own words beneath the 4 she had left. Words like courage, voice, truth, justice. By the time the last student sat down, the board was filled with their handwriting, messy but powerful. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that the lesson was never mine alone. It was yours." The bell rang. Chairs scraped. But instead of the usual rush, the students lingered, reluctant to leave. They filed out slowly, each giving her a nod, a smile, a word of thanks. Even Darren paused at the door. He didn't speak, but he gave her a look, not of defiance, but of something closer to respect. Then he walked out. When the room was empty, Ms. Daniels stood in front of the chalkboard, eyes tracing the words her students had left behind. She knew they would fade with time, erased by new lessons, new years. But the legacy would not fade. It would live in every student who walked through those doors. Because the lesson of Room 2B was not about a judo throw. It was about respect. And respect, once learned, can echo for a lifetime.